Hello everyone. For today's class, I will continue Joyce The Dead, and then I would like to wrap up. For last class, if you remind of the two last classes, what we've covered for Joyce The Dead, mainly its overview of the Irish's tragic national history, and within that context of Irish national history, then we also explore in what ways the term West Britain can be problematic. The West Britain is a term that Ms. Ivors calls Gabriel. How that term West Britain could be critical and problematic for someone. And then Gabriel is very much bothered by that term. So within all of the context of the Irish national history, this West Britain, this term can be problematic and can be very critical for today's class. And in that way, West Britain actually is very closely interlinked to Gabriel's national identity, who does not like his country, Ireland. For today's class, we will continue. We will maybe emphasize on Gabriel's identity by incorporating Gabriel's identity for the first half of the story to Gabriel's identity at the end of the story. So we will try to incorporate them together. For today's class, for the latter half of the story, I will particularly look at the Galway episode, or Michael Fury. Michael Fury in Greta's remembrance of her childhood in Galway, and Michael Fury is in Greta's remembrance of during her childhood. And how Gabriel comprehends Michael Fury, and how all of these things are together in relevant to Gabriel's identity at the ending. Before that, I would like to briefly overview Galway, which historically more symbolic. Galway is here. This star mark. This is the thing that I have made on the map, and these two as well. So Galway is here, but if you remind of the difference between Northern and Southern Ireland, as you see, Galway is a southern island. So that way, this province is poor and actually the worst condition. What Greta has spent her childhood is this place, Galway, and Michael Fury is someone Greta has met in Galway, and what Michael Fury originally comes from is outer world. It's here. Galway is here, so these two provinces, I'm not sure to what extent the two provinces are actually closer or distant from each other, but anyway, the point is that both Galway and outer world are the provinces in southern Ireland, not the Northern Ireland. This is the article that I have found out in terms of the condition of the Galway in around the mid-19th century. So I'm going to read aloud this excerpt of the article. The winter of 1846 and 1847 was the most severe in living memory. And the number of deaths from the hunger in the city averaged between 25 and 30 a week. So this means that in winter, during those periods, the number of deaths were around 25 to 30 each week. Why? That's because, for one thing, that's because of the hunger, the starvation. They have the lack of food. And there's one more critical thing is that epidemics of the cholera and typhoid fever, dysentery broke out. So these factors are related to the disease, and in addition to the hunger. And by May 1847, these fevers were accounting for 100 deaths a week. So this numbers of deaths increased like 5 times because of the epidemics. So during the 1847 and 1848, 11,000 inmates died in Galway workhouse. So workhouse is the place for the homeless. And on the bitterly cold morning of January 26, 1848, 2 children were found naked and dead on High Street and another on adjoining street. So this is the description of how the situation was worst in Galway, where Greta has spent her childhood, where actually Greta might have encountered all of this realistic picture. If we imagine that she has undergone all of this period. So actually Galway is the landscape on which the dead body were literally covered. So it's the landscape on the dead body were covered and people could not be with them. So that way, the Galway, the land as a landscape, is becoming symbolic historically. Michael Fury, we don't know the reason or why Michael Fury is dead, but I guess there's a hint. It's not definite, but I guess it could be at least a hint for us to conjecture why he becomes dead. On page 2198, it's 13th line from the top, and it's the descriptions of how and why Greta has met Michael Fury. And then when Greta explaining Michael Fury's condition, she explains that Michael Fury was in decline, they said, or something like that. I never knew rightly. So there's no right reason for Greta, the exact reason for being sick of Michael Fury, but in any way, he's in decline. But Galway at the time was undergoing the epidemics here, cholera, typhoid fever, and dysentery. So perhaps one of them could be the reason of Michael Fury. In that way, Michael Fury can be the evidence of the very harsh or very desperate or very tragic history of Galway during those times. So this is the part of when Gabriel responds to Greta's remembering Michael Fury on page 2197. So I'm gonna read aloud this part from the top. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth line. It's fourth line from the top. Greta says to Gabriel that, actually before this scene, Greta seemed abstracted, and Gabriel's wondering why my wife becomes abstracted, why is the reason of her being preoccupied. So Gabriel was wondering that, and Greta is telling here the reason. I'm thinking about a person long ago who used to sing that song. The title of the song is The Lass of Aughrim. This is the Irish folk song. And who was the person long ago? Asked Gabriel, smiling. It was a person I used to know in Galway when I was living with my grandmother, she said. So Gabriel actually was imagining that something good for him. He didn't expect this situation, that his wife was thinking someone else, not him. It was a person I used to know in Galway, and I was living with my grandmother, she said. So the smile passed away from Gabriel's face, and a dull anger began to gather again at the back of his mind, and dull fires of his lust began to glow angrily in his face. So here, Gabriel feels anger, fury, a rage. Someone you were in love with? Gabriel asked ironically. It was a young boy I used to know, she answered, named Michael Fury. He used to sing that song, The Lass of Aughrim. He was very delicate. Gabriel was silent. He did not wish her to think that he was interested in this delicate boy. I can see him so plainly, she said after a moment. Such eyes as he had, big dark eyes, and such an expression in them, an expression. Oh, then you are in love with him? Said Gabriel. I used to go out walking. So here Greta does not answer directly. Rather, she says, I used to go out walking with him, she said, when I was in Galway. A thought flew across Gabriel's mind. Perhaps that's why you wanted to go to Galway with that Ivor skull. He said coldly. Gabriel feels anger and rage, and here he responds to the reference to another man. Gabriel responded with coldly. So she looked at him and asked in surprise, what for? Her eyes made Gabriel feel awkward. He shrugged his shoulders and said, how do I know? To see him, perhaps? So Greta looked away from him along the shaft of the light towards the window in silence. He's dead. Michael Fury is dead. Without the exact reason of why he's being declining, but perhaps we may still have the hint if we regard the conditions of the Galway at the time. So here, what Gabriel's response to Greta's reference to Michael Fury, he shows a certain jealousy to his wife. But if we think that the Galway's condition and what Michael Fury has been undergoing during that time, what Greta evokes through her remembrance of Michael Fury may not only about the individual realm of remembrance, but it could be extended to broader scope of collective memory of Ireland, its tragic history. So in that way, the dead here, specifically Michael Fury, but more broadly, the dead in this short story itself, the dead in the short story can represent the dead in Irish collective memory of the past. So this is the way of how we can broaden individual memory into more collective memory. So with this in your mind, I would like to more closely analyze at the ending when Gabriel becomes calm. So with both literal sense of being dead, someone who is actually dead, and with also the figurative sense of the dead. So with this both sense of literal and figurative sense of the dead, I would like to go into further to the ending. So here, with the broader scope of being dead, or our broad way of understanding the dead, so drawing upon that perspective, broader way of understanding the dead, not just in literal sense, but in figurative sense, I would like to look at Gabriel's kind of the shifted perspective of the dead. Do you remember that Gabriel strongly argues that he doesn't want to linger in the past during his speech? So he's sick and tired of his country, and he didn't want to stay in the past, but he wants to live in the present. That's what he argues during the speech. But here, Gabriel shows a type of shifted perspective of the being dead or the past. On page 2198, at the bottom, Greta cried for a while and she was fast asleep, and Gabriel becomes calm himself. And the very last page, on page 2199, that's the Gabriel's contemplation, his speculation on the dead. I'm going to read the passage from its 10th line from the top. Poor Aunt Julia. It's 10th line from the top, starting by poor Aunt Julia, and it's going to be a long passage. Poor Aunt Julia, she too would soon be a shade. Shade here would represent the dead. Do you remember? Aunt Julia is old. He's quite old. Aunt Julia, she too would soon be the shade, the dead, with the shade of Patrick Morgan and his horse. He had caught that haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing Arrayed for the Brighter. Soon, perhaps here is Gabriel. Gabriel soon would be sitting in that same drawing room where they hold a party. But soon, Gabriel would be sitting there in the same drawing room, this time dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. The blinds would be drawn down, and Aunt Kate would be sitting beside him, crying and blowing her nose and telling him how Julia had died. He would cast about in his mind for some words and that might console her, and would find some lame and useless one. Yes, that would happen very soon. Here, if the death of the Michael Fury is based on the literal sense of someone who is but someone who is dead in the story. But here, and if that death is the past tense, here Gabriel imagines of the death of Aunt Julia. This is the case of the death in the future tense. So this way there's a coexistence of death in the past and the death in future. The room, then the tense in the imagination, the future tense in the imagination becomes to the present tense in Gabriel's speculation when he looks outward, when he looks outside through the window. The air of the room chilled his shoulders. He stretched himself cautiously along under the sheets and lay down beside his wife. One by one, they were all becoming shades. So this is again the past tense of the deaths who are already gone. Better pass boldly into that other world, the world of death, in the full glory of some passion, then fade with wither dismally with age. So this means that it could be better for someone to die with passion, with glorious passion, like Michael Fury. Michael Fury had a passion for Greta, and this is something lack for Gabriel. Gabriel didn't have that type of passion. So here Gabriel is thinking that perhaps it's better to have a passion and being dead with the passion rather than being fade away or being withered only with age. He thought of how who lay beside him had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears. So the tears here is not about rage or anger, but this tear is a generous one. So this way the tone or the mood of the Gabriel himself has been shifted. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under the dripping tree, probably Michael Fury. Other forms were near. Other forms of the dead were near with Michael Fury. His soul had approached that region. His soul here is Gabriel's soul. So with these people who are already dead, including Michael Fury, Gabriel's soul had approached them as well. Had approached to the region where dwell vast hosts of the dead. Vast host of the dead. I think that here James Joyce draws upon the imagery of the Galway once the land once was covered with all the dead bodies. So Gabriel himself, his soul approached to that region where dwells all of the vast host of the dead. he was conscious of but could not apprehend their wayward and flickering existence. So Gabriel could not apprehend, but here at least he is becoming more conscious of them. But do you still remember that Gabriel's kind of or very strong argument that he doesn't want the past? Here Gabriel is shifted. He's changed here. So his own identity. Gabriel's identity was fading out into a gray, impalpable world. And in this gray, impalpable world, the solid world, which this dad had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. Do you know what this sentence means? So the region or any imaginary world that Gabriel enters into, Gabriel's identity is entering, is a gray, impalpable world which does not have a very definite division between like black and white. But here, Gabriel goes into a very gray one. Can be in which something contrasting things can be mixed together. That could be those two contrasting things could be the dead or the living, or the past or the present. So Gabriel, in the first half of the short story, does not want the past, he wants to live the present. So that way he had a very definite division between those two words or between those two times. But here, Gabriel's the reason Gabriel is entering into a very gray one, which does not have very definite sense of the division. So I wouldn't say that from here, Gabriel can embrace both living and dead. I wouldn't say that way, but at least Joyce touches on certain potential of Gabriel's change in his identity. Let's go further. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again, and there's a snowing outside. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling mutinous Shannon waves. Softly up in the Bog of Allen and farther westward, softly falling into the dark mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling too upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Marcofury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstone, on the spears, on the little gate on the barren thorn. His soul, Gabriel's soul, swooned, becomes fainted very slowly, as he heard the snow, which falling faintly through the universe, not a certain divided region, but the universe. Snow is falling in the universe, like the descent of their last hand upon all the living and the dead. And this universe includes not the dead, not only the dead, but the living, but also the living. So this universe in which the snow is falling upon, all of the living and dead can be together. So this is the last part of today's class. And to comprehend Joyce's the short story, The Dead, I want you to contemplate on Gabriel's identity. Specifically, in what ways, if you see any change, or it's okay for you not to see it because it's your perspective, but in any way, whether Gabriel's identity has been changed or not, in any way, I think that there's a shifted stance from the first half of the story and latter half of the story. So please think about that. For next class, I would like to William Butler Yeats. I would like to cover William Butler Yeats. He is Irish poet, but who is of course different from James Joyce's world. So by reading Yeats's 4 poems, 1, 2, 3, 4. So by reading those four Yeats poems, I aim to cover his changes of his poetic vision and word. Probably at this point you might see the uploaded poems on eClass. Thank you for listening to today's class and have a good rest of the week.